Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Advocacy 101 Lunch and Learn. We are so happy to have you all here today, and this workshop is specifically designed for people who want more information about how to advocate for themselves and others. Today, we have as our presenter Haley Conrad, who is an intern with the St. Louis Arc and is a master's of social work candidate for her degree.
C101, the 5 W's, will be answering who, what, when, where, and why of advocacy today. So to get us started, if you could put in the chat, answer this question: what is advocacy?
Here we go. Standing up for yourself, speaking up to create change, making change, speaking up for myself, standing up for my daughter, speaking up for yourself or someone else, speaking about what you believe in, such as the participant. Yes. Very good.
Absolutely.
All right, Haley.
Great definitions there. So what we have, this is a definition from that is derived from Merriam-Webster Dictionary. It says advocacy is the act or process of supporting a cause or proposal or speaking out against a cause or proposal. So the reason I kind of wanted to get everyone's opinions on it before we read a definition is that it's these varied life experiences, opinions, or viewpoints that are central to advocacy. We're all going to have a different definition, but at the end of the day, we're all mostly trying to accomplish the same thing. We want something to change. We either want to support something or not support something, and advocacy is the act of trying to make that change. All right. So before we get into specifics of advocacy, we want to look over the history of disability rights. Essentially, if you don't know where you've been, you can't know where you're going. It's important to recognize the history and see some of the fruits of the efforts of advocates that came before us. So just a quick history of advocacy. We have Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. This law kind of began disability rights advocacy, and it prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities in programs that receive federal funding. So this was the basis of many others moving forward. The ADA in 1990, Americans with Disabilities Act, expanded on this into the public sector, prohibiting discrimination in employment, state and local government, public accommodations, telecommunications, and many other areas of life. Then we have the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. This is an act that ensures that children with disabilities are guaranteed access to free public education in the least restrictive environment.
So the Olmstead Act, Community Integration for Everyone of 1999, basically states that people who are in institutions or nursing homes have the right to live within the community. So if they request to be removed from the situation that they're in, they take priority over others for receiving community integration services. And then the Developmental Disabilities Assistance and Bill of Rights Act was reauthorized in 2000, and basically this is an extension of rights for people with disabilities as it relates to public accommodations.
So all of these are great examples of what advocacy in disability rights specifically can accomplish. It was because of the work of so many people standing up for their own rights that we are able to have these laws put into place. The next W, why advocate? So why would I want to advocate? Advocates represent themselves, others. They offer support, rally for change, educate others. Advocacy, just in general, is important for yourself and others. Policy decisions made at local, state, and national levels affect everyone in some way, shape, or form. So by participating in advocacy, we help alleviate any sort of threats to our rights, or we strengthen the policy decisions that we support. So we have better outcomes for our communities and individuals and our families. It's also important to recognize that not everyone can advocate for themselves. So when we start to advocate for others and rights for others, we help voice concerns that others may have trouble voicing themselves. So the role of an advocate is very varied, um, but that's kind of the why behind why we want to advocate for ourselves and others.
And advocacy doesn't just have to happen in the political arena, it can happen anywhere. It can happen at school, it could happen in the community. So it may be speaking up about a parking space not being accessible, or it might be talking about the educational rights of your child or yourself. So advocacy can take on a number of different looks.
Absolutely. And I think when we think of advocacy, we do tend to think laws and policy, which are important, but sometimes the other things, like you said, with schools and even policy in your own workplace can affect you more than some of the other things that are happening out there.
So, what could you all advocate for? What kinds of things do you feel a need to advocate for as an audience? You can put your answers in the chat.
Yeah, and the next slide has a couple questions to kind of help out with that. So when you're thinking about what do you advocate for, what's important to you and what's important to your family?
Community and school inclusion, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Mask mandates and COVID mitigation plans in schools. Yeah, that's an uphill battle.
Mm-hmm.
Employment opportunities, absolutely.
Yeah, and you can also think of this as, are there any policies that need to be in place that aren't right now? Which I think is what I'm hearing from a lot of the chat. So it's changing something that's current or advocating for something that should be in place even if it's not.
Yep, accessibility. That's what someone else wrote. Very good. Absolutely. That's an ongoing issue as well. Even with the ADA, not every place is accessible. More housing. Absolutely. Boy, we certainly need housing. Not just any housing, but accessible and affordable housing. Absolutely.
Housing and transportation are some of the biggest issues I see with accessibility in general right now.
Oh, yeah. Training for emergency responders and inclusion in the workplace and school. Yes, absolutely. And we are involved in training for first responders through the St. Louis ARC, but there's always more to be done.
All right. Well, thank you all for your answers there. You can continue putting them in the chat, but I'm going to go ahead and move on. So as you're thinking about the issues you want to advocate for, you also want to think about who you're advocating to. So one of the great things that you can do as a member of your city or your county or your state, wherever you're at, is that you can contact the legislators that represent you about the things that you want to see change. So, they want to know what's going on in their communities. They want to know the problems that you're facing, the feelings about the laws that are being passed. They want to know the facts at which our thinking and conclusions are based and any ideas we have to make things better. There are some legislators that have even shared that hearing from an individual they represent as opposed to like a lobbyist or a corporation has even more impact than some other forms of that advocacy because it's coming directly from you. It's coming directly from the people that they're representing and serving. And it's a way that they recognize that someone is taking time to share something that's really an issue in their community, which is the community that they serve. One important distinction here is knowing who you're advocating to as your legislator, and that there's a difference between state and federal and local, which can be kind of hard to figure out, but that's what we'll be discussing in our next slides here.
The other thing I think that's important to note is that when you do advocate for a specific situation and you are contacting your legislator, if there are other folks who are advocating for the same piece of information or the same piece of legislation, then I think it's important that you note that if legislators receive 8 to 10 responses from their constituents about an issue, that's considered a lot. So your voice does make a difference.
So here's our next W. Where can I find my legislators' information? If you are joining us from St. Louis or the St. Louis area, you can see your federal representatives at the bottom. But our federal senators for the entire state are Roy Blunt and Josh Hawley. In the St. Louis area, your federal representative is most likely Cori Bush or Ann Wagner. But to find specifically who represents you, there is a tool on the Missouri Senate's website where you can input your street address and your city, and it will tell you all the information of who represents you at your address. So this is an example form that I used with my own address. And you can see that it goes through your local legislators first. So my senator for the state of Missouri is Jill Shoup, and my representative for the state is Kevin Windham. But my U.S. House representative is Cori Bush. It also offers information about who the statewide elected officials are. So the governor, lieutenant governor, just anyone who's in those elected positions whenever that time comes around in November. And then at the bottom provides who your U.S. senators are, who represent the entire state. Even moving half a mile away from my house, I have a totally different person that represents me now. So this is a wonderful tool to figure out who specifically represents you where you live. And that will change if you move. So it's good to keep up on that information.
So you're going to do www.senate.mo.gov.
So now we know where to find their information, or at least who they are. Each of those text in red is a link as well, so it'll take you directly to their information page, which gives you their district and their email, phone number, sometimes, depending on if they have that up there.
The other thing that's really good about that page is when you click on their name, it'll give you a biography. So you can find out more about your specific legislators, especially your state legislators. You can find out what kinds of activities they're involved in, what boards they serve on, what some of their interests are. And what you may find is that maybe that individual has a child with a disability. Maybe they are a foster parent. Maybe they have served on a board for a non-for-profit that's similar to other non-for-profits that serve people with disabilities. So all of those things can be really helpful in helping you make a connection with them.
Now you've found who to contact. How do you contact them? So there's pretty common ways, at least during COVID times, to contact them: calling, writing, whether email or letter, scheduling a meeting. Usually outside of COVID times, some of them will also host town halls, which I think some of them are still doing just via Zoom or Teams or whatever virtual platform that they're deciding to do. But whatever format you choose, this is just a great opportunity to weigh in on the issues or policy changes that are currently going through your state or local legislature. Like I said, a lot of events are being conducted online. I know Roy Blunt just did another one, or is scheduling another town hall meeting online. So that's a great opportunity to come and ask questions. This is where you use your advocacy. Once you know who to contact, this is how you do it. You're using your advocacy to learn about their stances on issues, learn where they stand on the laws. And that's where you can hold them accountable for the positions they state. If they support something that you're also supporting and advocating for, and they express that support, continue engaging in that conversation with them to build more support as the law is being developed and going through the process. The more people speak of their support or lack thereof of a bill going through, the more that's going to affect those conversations that are happening on Capitol Hill or in your local legislator.
Somebody asked in the chat, what about a situation where you don't agree with the legislator and it's your legislator, how do you advocate against a piece of legislation that they're supporting?
That's a great question. So, from my experience, the best thing you can do in those situations is point out some of the impacts that that piece of legislation is going to have. Sometimes it's something that they hadn't even considered, that it was going to have a negative impact on some of their constituents. So simply pointing that out can be effective, especially if you have more people that are also pointing out that negative consequence. There are clearly some issues where that's not going to be effective, and they're very strong in their opinion on that particular issue. But the more people that can express their dissent, the better.
The other thing that sometimes will happen is it may not be your legislator that has the piece of the bill or the piece of legislation, which is even better. And then you would reach out to your own legislators and explain that this piece of legislation is coming down the pike and it's going to affect things for your family or yourself and how that's going to happen. So if you can get enough legislators to vote against that piece of legislation, that's another route you can take. But if it is your legislator, I think Haley's right. You just have to educate them to the best of your ability about why that piece of legislation is not going to be helpful.
When is advocacy important? We've already given some ideas of when you can advocate, but when is it important? Any time that you feel that something needs to change or that you're supporting a proposed change is when your advocacy is important. So there's no special day. It's important on voting day, but it's also important every single day that something is going through the pipeline of becoming a law or being discussed on the floor or even out of session, when folks are back in their communities. If it's important to you, it's important for them to hear about it.
One thing you can also do to gain more information for yourself is once you find out who your legislator is, many of them have an electronic newsletter. So you can click on receive newsletter from your legislator and you can get regular correspondence from them about what they're working on, what they're concerned about, what's just been passed, things like that. And one of my state representative also puts in her newsletter when she's going to be available to the public as far as town halls and things like that, so that you can actually go in person if you want to see her. So getting on the mailing list for the newsletter is another really good way to find out what's going on. Here's another question. What are some of the best, easiest ways to track legislation or know when something is coming up for a vote we may wish to contact our legislators about? Really good question. So there are lots and lots of bills that come through the legislature process every year at the federal and state level. And so it is very, very difficult to find out everything that's going on. So one of the things that I like to do is get on several listservs that alert me when something is coming up. So if it's children related, you might want to reach out to Kids Win Missouri. If it's state or if it's disability related, you may want to reach out to the Governor's Council on Disabilities, the Missouri Council for Developmental Disabilities. You can also reach out to me. I am on many, many listservs and I review legislation all the time. And then what I do is I let people know when that bill or that legislation is coming up. And so all you have to do is let me know you want that information and I will add you to my email list to get that information. So the St. Louis Arc belongs to several legislative lobby groups and coalitions that are following this legislation, some of whom are following this legislation full time, which most of us don't have time to do. So those full-time folks, they're funneling that information to me, and then I can funnel it out to anyone who wants it.
So our last slide here, I just wanted to provide an example of a process that you can follow. So just kind of a simple form of, you want to advocate for something. Here's some steps to follow to help you figure that out. So the first thing would be to figure out if you're advocating, especially for laws, if it's a federal law or a state law. To do that, you can look at who the legislators are that are proposing it and figure out if they are state legislators or if they are federal legislators. So by figuring that out, you can kind of determine if it's federal or state. Then you want to see if it's a House bill or a Senate bill. Typically, that's a little easier to find out. Usually, House bills have an HB and a number, and Senate bills are SB and a number following it. And so once you know if it's federal or state, if it's a House bill or a Senate bill, you know which senator to contact, you know who it is that you need to reach out to, and you can choose that method of contact, whether that's calling, writing, setting up, a meeting over Zoom with them if they're taking that. And then you can advocate by communicating with them what you would like to see done. I know advocating can be kind of scary, so sometimes following a process like this can kind of take some of that fear out of it by knowing, okay, I just have to do these 3 things, and then I can go about advocating for what I need to see changed. So an example here for me is if I wanted to advocate for a bill that was going through the Missouri State Senate. I would know that the first person that I'd probably need to contact about that is Jill Shook. And that's how, through their website, that's how I found out who my senator was, who I would need to contact. And she would probably be my first point of who I'd want to contact about that bill. Then I decide, do I want to call her? Do I want to email her or write her a letter? Or try to set up a meeting with her, or see if she has any town hall events going on that I can attend to ask those questions and let my voice be heard. And then once you have all those pieces, the basic tools for advocacy are in place for you to use.
I think one thing that's really important also is that sometimes you may not get to talk to the representative or the senator, even if you're in Jefferson City to visit. So oftentimes you end up talking to their legislative assistant, their staff person in the office. They are there full time while the legislators are all over the place. They're all over the Capitol, they're at home, they're doing all kinds of things. So if you're unable to meet with your legislator and you end up meeting with their staff person, there's nothing wrong with that. The staff person sometimes is very, very knowledgeable, and the legislators change. They're voted in, they're voted out, but oftentimes the staff remains the same. So when a new legislator comes into office, they may keep that staff from the prior person. So there's some longevity that happens with those staff people. And so if you need to reach out to the staff person and talk to them, instead of the legislator, that can be just as powerful because they're going to take notes and they're going to share that information with the legislator. I thought I might pull up the Senate website and just click on it so people could see how it works, which is that www.senate.mo.gov, and then you'll do legislator lookup, and then you're in there. So let's put in the ARC's address. I'm going to put in 1177 North Warson, and then St. Louis. And then we're going to look up legislators. All right, and it's hard to see this, but you'll see here that it tells, there, that helps. So we also have a Senator Jill Shoop in as our senator, the same that Haley does, even though she's at a different address. And then our representative is different. We have Tracy McCreary as our senator, and Cori Bush is our federal House representative. And then it doesn't look like we have, let's see, is there anybody? Oh, there they are. There's Roy and Josh. So anyway, and then you can see the other folks, Governor Parsons, Lieutenant Governor, Secretary of State, etc. And then someone else wrote, I write many letters. Are there good resources for example letters to send to our legislators? Nothing that's real specific. There may be some general things. I think the most important thing is to make sure that you're addressing them as dear senator or dear representative and not by their first names. You'll want to write, if it is about a bill and you know the bill number, you might want to write that on there or email it on there. And then what it is that you want to have happen. You want it to pass, you don't want it to pass, and then why. And I think as long as you put a personal story in there, if possible, or a personal example, that can be extremely helpful. And then you want to always thank them for their time, thank them for their efforts, regardless. And then you want to make sure your contact information is included in that. Now, oftentimes, if it's a piece of legislation that someone is lobbying against or for, they'll send you a typed up message that has everything already in there. And what legislators oftentimes will tell me is they don't read those because it's like a rubber stamp. Everybody writes the exact same thing and they don't put anything special. So I go ahead and use the language that I'm given for that pat response. But at the very beginning, I put the reason I'm sending it so that there's some personal information in there that kind of separates it from just being a standard letter. So sometimes the standard letter can have really good verbiage that you can use, but again, you'll want to personalize it with some other information, even if it's just a simple, this is who I am, I'm your constituent. Below is some information that I find very useful or helpful, and then you can go ahead and send the pat answer. But always put some type of introduction at the beginning. The other thing that you may want to think about is you can role play. So if you're going to make a phone call, you can call your friend and you can talk to her or him, and you can ask them some of the same questions or share some of the same information you were going to share in your phone call and get a little feedback from your friend saying, that just wasn't clear enough for me. Or I think you can add another personal example or something like that. So it can be really fun and interesting to do a practice session. So again, writing may be a better alternative for you. Or again, practicing that phone conversation. The other thing you can do is if you're going to be meeting with the legislator in person, feel free to bring someone with you. And if you have a family member with a disability and you're going to be meeting with the legislator, bring them. That is so important. Just having your legislator meet your family member can make a huge difference. Thank you all for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for attending and listening.
And we look forward to hearing from you.